All right, welcome to your first video lecture on the topic of research. And so today we're just going to kind of review the content of chapter 1, build on some of the foundational information that was shared on there to kind of set the stage for like why is research even important and why do we do this, and how do we go about starting the process. So here is a hypothetical question. So imagine you're a social worker, which hopefully will all be in the next couple of years. And your supervisor assigned you to follow one or more of the following tasks. So they might ask you to document how your interventions are helping your client. So thinking back to individuals and families, let's say you just asked your client to complete a journal every week to talk about their anger towards their spouse. And you're going to be documenting that. You might have been asked to find out what the most pressing needs of your community are. Been asked to read a complicated report related to your client population, or to compare the needs of clients from differing ethnic backgrounds, or you need to convince a funding agency that your job actually should be continued and is important. So, what do all of these tasks have in common? I'm sincerely hoping that because we are in research class right now, your brain automatically goes to thinking, oh, they all have a research component in common, which is 100% the answer that I am looking for. All right, so let's talk about different purposes of research in social work. So we have identified 4 of them: exploration, description, explanation, and evaluation. And so within exploration, that's just really you're kind of doing data collection. If you're thinking about the general method, you're providing yourself with some familiarity with a topic. So let's say you are a brand new baby social worker and you're in your first job and you are tasked to work with, let's say you're at a nursing home and you've never worked with the elderly population before. And quite frankly, you've never really even worked in a nursing home or know what goes on there. So you might do some exploration to see, like, what is the role of a social worker in a nursing home? What is the experience like? What services are available? What things do you typically encounter? You might want to do some research about dementia, Alzheimer's, different diseases that elderly people might experience. So you want to gain that knowledge to kind of build a foundation to be able to do effective services. The second one would be to provide a description of something. And so you can kind of see these tend to build a little bit on each other. So you might want, within description, you're basically just describing. I don't really like using the same words in the to define what it is, but you're describing situations and events that you have observed. So let's say you took a walk downtown and you went on a chunk of Division Street, which is, you've heard, tends to be rather notorious for having a higher population of individuals who are experiencing homelessness. There's a higher level of substance use in the area. There's a higher level of prostitution in the area. These are things that you may have gathered in some exploration, and you kind of want to know firsthand, is this what is going on? So you take a walk down there and kind of do some gathering of data, and then your output then is to describe what you've seen. There's no analysis, there's no synthesizing of the information. It's basically just a retelling to kind of paint a picture or give an idea to somebody of what is going on. And so this tends to be just very objective facts, like you're describing what you observed. There is some subjective personal reflection because we're telling it from our perspective, but that's how you are now giving out the data versus taking it in. So if we're going then to explanation as another purpose of social work, it's to provide the why as to what has been described. And so going back to the example of Division Street. So it described that you took a walk down a mile stretch, you observed X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z. And after you spent some time maybe talking to the people, knocking on businesses' doors to see what was housed on that street, you've come to the conclusion to explain that there's a higher level of individuals experiencing homelessness on that street, is because there's a ton of social services located on that street that specifically target that population. There's God's Kitchen, where individuals can come get free meals. There is Guiding Light to help with substance use. There is Dégagé, which helps provide a place for individuals who are experiencing homelessness to spend time and even to potentially get housed. Cherry Health is right down there where they might receive their case management, mental health, physical health services. And so you are explaining that there's a higher level of these individuals down there because they're accessing services at that time, which then has led to more people being down there. Now, I'm just kind of like oversimplifying things to give an example, but that's kind of how you would take the information that you've described and give rationale as to why it's been happening. And so this can help us, if we're thinking about like the social work profession, understand client behaviors, system behaviors, community difficulties or barriers to accessing something or barriers to improvement. That's kind of where the explanation comes in, because we want to know the why. And then there's also evaluation. And so this is kind of thinking, in the general method, there's the evaluation stage that usually comes after an intervention has occurred. So whether that's like a micro intervention where you're doing one-on-one, or like a policy intervention that would be like a community or organizational level program, could be like a group. You want to know if what you implemented produced the outcomes you are looking for. And so you're going to have to collect data and information, test your hypothesis, and then discuss if you receive the outcome you want, why or why not, and maybe where you went wrong or where you went right. And so it's, again, aiming to make services effective and purposeful for individuals. All right. So in that previous slide, we talked a lot about gaining knowledge in order to be purposeful. And so there's 5 different ways that we acquire knowledge and how we know things. So the first one would be authority. So someone in a position of power has told you that this is in fact true and reliable and credible and is to be believed. So I think about adults telling children that Santa is real and he brings the gifts. And children will believe this because their parents are in authority or a position of power. They might have seen a movie or a TV show which they see as someone as in power because it's what they're watching and they're young. So just because someone in authority or power position told you it's true, it does not mean it's always credible. Now, if there's individuals who believe in Santa in this class, I don't want to burst your bubble. But do we have factual evidence to show that Santa is in fact the one bringing presents and going to every house at night? That is up for you to decide. But are we accepting it just because an authority figure told us that it is true? This was very present, I think, during the COVID era, especially with what people chose to believe or not believe regarding the severity of the illness, how transmittable it was, the benefits of vaccinations, the benefits of quarantine, social distancing, and often a person of authority would come in, so the CDC, the health department, etc., the government or whoever, and it coming in to say like, yes, this is what's happening, or no, you guys are being made a fool. And so that was for me, a very difficult time, because you'd have multiple authority figures saying conflicting information. Which one was right and which one was wrong? Who do you believe? Who don't believe? What is credible and what is not? So it's just you need to be very mindful on how that can come into play. So tradition is another way that we acquire knowledge. It's considered to be true and valid just because it's how it's always been done. And so if you think about like maybe even parenting, if you have children, or maybe babysit or whatever, you've observed how your parents parented you, which they probably learned from watching their parents or whoever was the parental role in their life, who they learned that from the person ahead of them, et cetera, et cetera. So often it's passed down generationally. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing or meaning it's not true, but we just have to weigh what is the credibility of it. Is it beneficial? If you think about like traditionally women didn't have the right to vote. And so people continue to accept it just because that's the way it's always been done and we want to fit in. Women might not have the right to vote today. Slaves might be present in America still. Someone had to break tradition because they identified what was being said was not in fact true. And so there's a lot of value tradition. I've learned how to do a lot of cooking through tradition, asking somebody for a recipe that's been handed down from year to year to year. And so there's a value to it, and it's often how we develop our worldview is through tradition. But in order to be credible, we have to be mindful of how the source and if there is validity to what's being shared. A third way is through experience. You gain knowledge by having something happen to you or kind of what you've lived through. So I have been to therapy before. I've had a couple different therapists. And so I had to be mindful when I came into being the therapist role was not to assume that my clients were experiencing the same feelings that I did when I went to therapy. And so I knew what worked well for me because of my experience. And I was like, oh, this intervention was really impactful. When my therapist did this, it was really impactful. So now I need to do that because, of course, it's going to be helpful for my clients. And so I had to check my bias of that and be like, just because it worked well for me, I can't assume that they're going to be experiencing the same thing because we're different people. And so experience can be really, really powerful and empowering, but we just have to be so mindful that our bias is not clouding our judgment and causing more harm for the clients. And so sometimes when we do like our internships, if somebody grew up in foster care system, we have to weigh, is that the most beneficial internship for you to do? Because your experience is going to significantly give you knowledge that not everybody has. But is it going to create a bias that you're going to then not be able to effectively and objectively see different situations based on your own experience? So it's both, like it's a pro and a con. Beliefs and intuition. So beliefs are mainly acquired through tradition and authority. Can also kind of be like your faith system. And so again, you just have to weigh like these beliefs into intuition are really, really important. Intuition is kind of that gut feeling, but you can't solely rely just on this because a lot of it is subjective and isn't necessarily measurable, or you can't always validate intuition. So like intuition can be really helpful because you might be wondering, you can't get a hold of your client and your gut is saying something bad happened. You have no evidence or criteria to say that, but your gut's telling you something's off. You follow up on your gut and you might find out like, yeah, they fell in their apartment a couple days ago. They can't get to the phone and they've been lying on the floor. You knew something was off because it was atypical and you were able then to help. So they're really important, but you can't base all of your knowledge base on that. And then there's the research findings, which are derived from the scientific method, which we are going to talk about on the next slide. So there is what's called the scientific method of inquiry. So there's 4 phases to it, and this is kind of the method that we will model and use in this course. So the first phase is observing and measuring something about a person, object, or event. We noticed that mothers and children tend to have some level of attachment, whether it's good or bad. We've observed that tends to be something that's present in the mother-child relationship. We spent some time at a daycare and we noticed that not all children and mothers attach the same. And we noticed that the mothers who dropped off their kids and left early without saying goodbye or giving kisses, the children tended to act out longer than children who had a lot of snuggles before they got dropped off. So we're making an assumption or hypothesis that if a mother spends 5 minutes snuggling their kid before drop-off, the children will have a smoother transition into daycare. So we test this assumption. We observe and monitor and track, let's say, 10 different drop-offs. We see how the children have behaved afterwards. And now we're revisiting like, yes, we actually did notice that proves to be true. So we can say maybe we're going to encourage mothers to spend 5 minutes when they're dropping off a child. Or you might be like, yeah, it's inconsistent. There's no consistency, so we have to remake a new hypothesis. So we gain some information in validity by testing this out